Welcome to today's edition of Northshore Talk. We have a very special program for you today with a special guest here from New Orleans. Let me give you some background on him. This is John Wade II. He is an author, an investor, a philanthropist, also the founder of a nonprofit organization called Soldiers of Love, an active member of his church and civic organizations in the area. Mr. Wade holds an MA from the University of Georgia and has worked in a range of fields. His extensive travels, which looks like it incorporates most of the world, has inspired him to collect some essays that became a fascinating book. And so we're going to be talking about that book and some of the things that have developed since then. Mr. Wade lives in New Orleans, has lived there since 1977, and I find that he grew up in the South. So let's hear what Mr. Wade has to share with us today. Welcome to the program today.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, we appreciate you coming up from New Orleans, and you have just a wealth of information to share with us today. Tell us what, you have a TV program, a little small series that is an outgrowth of this book, and that is called A World That Works. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what is that all about?
Well, there are 10 elements that are in the book that I've developed as part, I've been inspired to enunciate as part of a heaven on earth, and 3 of those elements we used as part of a series: peace, ecological harmony, and racial harmony. We did some very interesting shows about those things, and that took us to Costa Rica, to Washington, D.C., to New York City, and to New Orleans.
All right, so let me understand this. You have the book. It has 10 elements in it. So you have pulled out 3 of those elements and developed a television program, each one highlighting one of those elements.
That's correct.
All right, and then we're going to be airing those programs here on the station at another time, so you could be watching for those. All right, and so tell us those 3 elements one more time.
Ecological harmony, which was filmed in Costa Rica. Peace, which has got some film from Reagan, Carter, Washington, D.C., and also Costa Rica at the United Nations mandated University for Peace. That was a very interesting visits that we paid down there, where they actually it was something that I didn't know anything about. For instance, that there was a University for Peace, which actually has 70 nations represented when we were there. And they're actually going out in the world getting master's degrees, and I think heading us in the right direction. That's peace, ecological harmony, and racial harmony.
How did you get started in all this? What was your inspiration, or what was the need that you saw?
Well, I think it was a spiritual thing as well as the travel thing that did it. I believe that there's a little piece of God within each of us and all of us since the dawn of humankind, and that God has meant from the very beginning for us to have a heaven on earth someday, somehow, and that's in His plan. So it was a spiritual kernel behind it, but at the same time, 90% of the book is really about humankind doing things or trying to do things that head us in the right direction.
When you say you were inspired by your travels, were you visiting other cultures where you saw human suffering or lack, or what do you mean by your travels inspired you?
Well, one of the trips that inspired me was a trip to the Holy Land, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. And I I did a lot of writing. Actually, I have a self-published book, Deep Within My Heart, which I wrote about. What I wrote when I was there in the Holy Land is in that book.
Did you see things, specific things, situations in these cultures?
Maybe it's something like an optimistic view of life and of spirit and of God. If you have that optimism, you you think that there's a point to it all. There's a goal involved, and I pray for those 10 elements every night because I really believe that in prayer, and that eventually will happen. Another thing, I went to a conference down in Florida, and they asked. We were talking about the 10 elements and whatnot, and I put it. They said within 50 years, what do you think will happen? You know, different people had different things that they thought were going to happen, and everybody was asked to put a timetable. So I said, these 8 things I think can happen within 50 years. Peace, security, freedom, democracies, prosperity, spiritual harmony, and racial harmony. The other 2, health, because I think health means not only being healthy, it also means not having death. So I'm not. That's very much in God's hands. The other one, moral purpose and meaning. We don't necessarily do the right thing all the time by any means, and so for us to do the right thing there, that definitely is going to take a lot of help from up above.
That is a very optimistic view of the next 50 years. And so you feel that by pursuing those elements, do you have specific goals within each of those elements? I mean, peace, for instance. I mean, how long have people been on the earth? We've never had peace.
There's a very good essay by Thomas McFall. I've read 3 of his books, and 2 in manuscript form, and he talks about how he goes back 5,000 years and then forward 50 years, and he says early on people fought to have tribes, and so tribes were formed, and then after that nations were formed also by warfare. But now we're to the point in human existence where communication and the internet, satellites, transportation, trade, we had so many things interlocking between us that we're at a point where we no longer have to go through warfare like we did. And I think there's going to be a cessation of warfare far before 50 years.
Well, what about thinking along those lines, different philosophies where their philosophy really is, to take over and to dominate? How would those? How do you foresee those coming to a point where they would change their whole philosophy?
Well, I think what comes to mind in the book is the radical Islam, and those particular people are not a loving religion. Their religion is not based on God because it's based on hate, and so I think that's something that has to be dealt with. But I think it can be dealt with, and I think it will be dealt with, and I think if we can have robust, stable, prosperous democracies, we can have a lasting peace within the world.
So your sense is that coming to a place of peace in the world is connected to democracies being
I think so.
solid
And there's an essay in the book by Dan Reeder, the chairman of the political science department at Emory University, and he talks about how that very few, almost no wars have been conducted between democracies. And he talks about how Europe became democracies through World War II, and then later the end of the Cold War in Eastern Europe, and has now a zone of peace where it used to be the most war-torn continent around, especially in the 20th century.
your episode that is about peace. What is covered in that particular episode?
One thing is President Reagan and how he went to the Berlin Wall and said, "Tear down this wall." We have a clip of that. That's inspiring. And then it's also his negotiations with Mikhail Gorbachev. That was an interesting part. And then we show to have balance. This book has balance. We also have President Carter when he was at Camp David with President Begin and Prime Minister Sadat, and how they came to an accord that still has a peace between Egypt and Israel. So that's been a lasting peace. So that was well worthwhile.
Mr. John Wade, we're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our discussion. Welcome back. We're talking with Mr. John Wade, who is a resident of New Orleans, but is a world traveler and has written or compiled a book of essays and developed some TV episodes to go along with some of the elements in his book. So let's continue our discussion. One of the elements we haven't touched on yet has to do with racial harmony.
Yes, the racial harmony was a particularly good episode in that it starts off with Martin Luther King Jr. And his march on Washington and meeting President John F. Kennedy there and making his "I Have a Dream" speech. We have some of that. Interesting enough, the book also has a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. where he was before the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, looking back over 10 years that it had been in existence and the amazing changes that had happened over the South during that period of time. Another major part of the racial harmony episode was Martin Luther King, was Louis Armstrong, and he did we have some wonderful clips of him, and he was America's ambassador to the world. He had the first variety show where African American was on. He had a policy in his contract that if he played someplace, he had to stay there, and so he sort of helped open up Las Vegas to African Americans. And he was a goodwill ambassador, and his legacy is still being lived on now with the Satchmos Fest annual here in New Orleans. It's growing, and also a Louis Armstrong jazz camp, both of which we covered in the episode.
It seems that you have sort of examined our culture, past and present, and picked out certain inspirational figures and drawn some insights from their lives. Was that have anything to do with how the book developed, or who you asked to contribute in terms of the essays?
Well, I'll take credit for compiling the book and reading the book and believing in the book and uh, asserting the book, but I have to give credit to my director, Lamar Berry, for putting it into action into a television show that really makes it come alive on television.
Really helps illustrate the principles that you're speaking of.
Yes.
And is that the purpose of these television episodes?
Yes, it's all an effort to help. I have a pledge. I will try to love and help create a heaven on earth. I will try to love and help create a heaven on earth. And if a lot of people live by this implicitly, but if we really got everybody living by it explicitly, amazing things would occur.
It would sounds like the world could be a wonderful place if everybody would adopt that philosophy.
Well, if you really look at things, we had slavery, 150 years ago? We had women couldn't vote 100 years ago. There's been tremendous progress in the world. There are a lot more democracies in the world now than there were just decades ago. And India and China are much more prosperous. They were just in abject poverty, much of the population there before. It's been tremendous. Technologically, there's no question. Knowledge has increased tremendously. Also, imagination from knowledge, innovation has come forward tremendously. What is possibly not kept up with this kind of progress is wisdom. But there are two essays about wisdom in the book, because wisdom runs through all 10 of the elements. But no one is totally wise or unwise, according to Copthorne MacDonald. He also said the definition of wisdom is interesting too, that wisdom is general knowledge, and none of us have that, but there are degrees, and the positive values such as truth, compassion, kindness, the golden rule, justice, peace.
All of that all together makes
Wisdom is the positive values, where as opposed to the negative values such as envy and greed. Envy and greed are kind of go together, really.
In your view, what would be, if you're just looking out at the world or even at our nation, what is the most urgent thing that we should be doing?
Possibly the most urgent thing that I can see is we have got to come to our senses, not only in the United States, but in Europe and Japan, and address the debt situation. Otherwise, 2008 may be looked at as prosperity rather than a bad time. We can't keep incurring debt the way we are, and there's a limit. And prosperity is something that I don't believe in materialism, but at the same time, you got to have basic needs met to the people, not only in the United States but around the world, because we're so interconnected.
The debt crisis you see as the number one
Debt
crisis.
And deficit entitlements, it's all together.
Prosperity is one of your 10 elements. Don't have a TV episode about that one just yet. Is that something in the works? Further episodes on these other elements?
We would hope to do. Lamar and I were talking about that the other day. We were thinking about freedom, democracies, and prosperity. Those would be three that I would like to do.
What kind of response have you been getting with these episodes? How have they aired broadly at this time?
They are actually aired in over 300 stations across the nation, but they haven't aired everywhere yet. Uh, we're we're not really sure what the response is yet. It's too early to tell.
Okay, not getting a lot of email.
We are getting increased levels of our website, world10.org, and it seems to be coming in spikes, so it may be related to the shows being aired.
All right, well, very possibly. And that is a good point to bring up. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about this book or these programs, world10.org, correct, is the website, world10.org, and it's the number 10, not spelled out. We'll put it on the screen here. And you can go and do a little reading there, find out about these 10 elements, and learn a little bit more about this particular way of looking at the world. Anything else you want to share with us today? It sounds like you have quite an optimistic view of the future, and that's refreshing to hear these days because a lot of people are not so optimistic.
Well, I really believe that we're in the innovation age right now, and companies like Apple have seen the way to do very well, and one of the ways they've done it is simplify. And I think our government needs to be simplified, our laws need to be simplified, our taxes need to be simplified. Those are things that need to be done.
I think, well, I would agree with that.
I think that as far as taxes go, we need to completely scrap. I don't think anybody on the government side or CPAs, tax attorneys, hardly anybody really comprehends taxes. They can, and it's so unclear. Plus the fact that the ones that are hurt the worst are the small people who can't get armies of CPAs or attorneys to interpret these things for them. They have to try to figure it out themselves and deal with people in the government who don't understand them either.
So simplify the tax law, simplify the government overall.
And streamline the government. We've got way too many people, and we can't afford it anymore.
I witnessed some of that myself, and as a resident of New Orleans, I'm sure you did too, after Katrina in this area, that so much government going on that nobody knew what the other one was doing.
Well, see, I feel like if you're really intelligent, you can look at what happened with Katrina and you can say, the Coast Guard did a good job. So government agencies can do a good job, but there's some things it's sort of necessary that they do, but there are lots of things like the Tennessee Valley Authority. Why is it still with us? It was after it goes all the way back to the Great Depression.
And there's probably a lot of laws on our books and a lot of agencies that are just like that. I do so appreciate you coming all the way up here to Hammond to speak with us about this. Where can we get your book at a local store here?
I know you can get it at Amazon.com and Pelican.com and BarnesandNoble.com. I'm not familiar with your local bookstores, whether they have it or not.
Okay, and then be watching for these upcoming episodes on this station and others. Tell us the name of those episodes again.
Peace, ecological harmony, and racial harmony.
Find out what it's all about. Thanks for joining us today on Northshore Talk. Thank you so much, Mr. Wade, for being with us today.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.